This is the Insta360 X4 action camera. This is Insta360's fourth iteration at 360-degree cameras. I've always assumed that 360-degree cameras were a little bit more on the gimmicky side. However, with Insta360 making their fourth generation of these 360 cameras, I had to sit there and wonder what am I missing? So for my YouTube videos, I shoot the studio shots like this one right here with my DJI Pocket Osmo 3. I don't use one of the DSLR cameras like the Sony ZV-E1 or any of those other fancy cameras. I like the DJI Osmo Pocket 3 because of the fact that it can give me kind of like the studio shot like you're seeing here, but then it also can be a gimbal. It can also be on the go type vlogging camera. And so even though the DJI Osmo Pocket 3 is a good camera, I'm wondering, is this better? And so the sensors on this camera is going to be 1/2 inch on each side. So there's two cameras and they're essentially going to loop around and capture 360 angles around whatever it is that you're recording. The biggest thing about this particular camera, and the thing that Insta360 is promoting, is the fact that you never have to reframe your shot again. So if you're not a videographer, or maybe you're just kind of getting into it, the thing about framing is going to be like I have here. I have the blue lights over here, and then I have the red lights over here. My head is in the center of the screen, and then there's just kind of framing aspects that a normal typical camera would have to abide by. But this is a little bit different because all you have to do is press record and then just go. And that's because of the fact that this camera with two sensors, two 1/2 inch sensors, is going to capture 360 degrees around this particular device. And so when you press record, it's capturing not just you, just like a normal camera would. It's not just capturing the outside of what a normal camera would. It's capturing that one over there. It's capturing that one down there. It's capturing that one down there. It's capturing that one up there. And so this camera is going to allow you to more so live in the moment versus actually trying to set up that frame. All right, so some technical stuff about this camera. I'm gonna make this as digestible as possible, just in case you're not tech savvy. And so the camera lenses, the 1/2 inch camera lenses on this Insta360 X4 is going to be f1.9 aperture. And so if you're not familiar with the tech aspects of what that term means, it just means how much light is being allowed into the camera to capture the details that you're trying to capture. So the next technical detail we're gonna be talking about in this video is going to be the photo and the video resolution. And I'm actually going to be reading this off of my notes because it's a lot to go through. But before we get to that, let's talk about some of those simple terms again. And so when I say the word resolution, that's essentially going to be how good of the quality that video or that picture is going to be. When I say frames per second, or FPS, that's going to be the amount of frames that are captured per second. So typically for both resolution and frames per second, the higher the number, the better quality you're gonna get. And again, that's not objective. That's going to be subjective to the situation, to the person. But for the most part, a lot of content creators, a lot of YouTubers, a lot of photographers, a lot of cinematographers, they're actually going to be using a mixture of resolution and frames per second to capture that moment. All right, so now that we kind of got the basics down for resolution and frames per second, or FPS, let's talk about the two different lenses that are allowed to be used on the Insta360 X4. So the first type of video resolution for the lenses we're going to be talking about is the 360 because, again, it has two cameras. So the X4 is going to be capable of shooting 8K at 30 frames per second, 25 frames per second, and 24 FPS. It also has the capabilities of recording at 5.7K plus at 30 frames per second, 25 frames per second, and 24 frames per second. So if you're not familiar with the 5.7K plus shooting resolution, that's essentially just saying that the camera is going to try to maximize every pixel it can to try and get to that 8K resolution mark without actually having to switch to 8K. And so you might be wondering, well, Derek, isn't 8K better? It is better for all intents and purposes for resolution, but 8K videos take up a lot of memory. I actually run out of space on my SD card because of the fact that I was shooting too much 8K videos. Continuing on with 360 video recording capabilities, this also shoots at regular 5.7K at 60 FPS, 50 FPS, 30 FPS, and 25 FPS. And then we have the good old 4K, which is going to bump up the capabilities for frames per second. So this Insta360 X4 camera can shoot at 4K with 100 frames per second, 60 frames per second, 50 frames per second, 25 FPS, and then also 24 FPS. And again, just remember, if you are new to cinematography or you're trying to get into the hobby or the trade, typically you want to have the best quality. So the higher 8K, 5K, whatever resolution is typically going to be better. And then typically the higher frames per second or FPS is going to be better because it gives you more options to edit your video in post. And so the Insta360 camera, even though it has two lenses, you can actually use just one of them. You don't always have to use two lenses. If you just want to use this as a typical camera where you just kind of do a point and shoot, you totally could do that. If you are going to be shooting with single lens, you're going to be able to shoot at 4K, 60 FPS, 50 FPS, 30 FPS, 25 FPS, and then 24 FPS. With the single lens, you're also able to shoot at 2.7K at 60 FPS, 50 FPS, 30 FPS, 25 FPS, and then 24 FPS. And then we have the old standard of 1080p at 60 FPS, 50 FPS, 30 FPS, 25 FPS, and then 24 FPS. I dare you to say all of that 3 times fast. If you do, I'll give you a shiny golden star sticker. And so this may all sound a little bit confusing. I mean, what do all these numbers mean? So when you're watching TV, Netflix, a movie, or whatever it is, typically those movies and those shows that you're watching on Netflix or at the movie theaters, those are typically shot in between 24 frames per second and 30 frames per second. That's just kind of how the video science works for our human eye. However, with newer technology and just newer standards being pushed, a lot of creators, a lot of movies, a lot of shows are starting to release their particular content. And then you'll actually see platforms like YouTube and other platforms around that offer some type of resolution at some type of frames per second. So a lot of YouTube creators now are starting to release their videos in, let's say, 4K 60, which makes your video super buttery smooth, and sometimes it looks a little weird if your eyes aren't used to it. And so just like any other camera out in the market, the Insta360 and other cameras like the Samsung Galaxy Z Fold 6 or the iPhone 14 Pro Max, they're gonna offer some type of shooting modes. And so this is not going to be any different. So there are 7 different types of video modes that the Insta360 X4 offers. So you have the typical video mode, which is what most of us are gonna be using. And then you have active HDR or active high dynamic range. Then we have time lapse, time shift, and then bullet time. And then we have loop recording and pre-recording. And so there's a feature on this camera that's going to allow for the content creator or whoever's yielding this camera to have what they call me mode. And so this me mode is going to allow you to be the star of the shot. It's essentially going to track you no matter what you're doing or what type of flip you're doing. If you're skiing, if you're biking, or whatever, that me mode is going to allow you to see yourself, and it's going to allow for you to be in frame 100% of the time. It's going to optimize the settings and the features inside to make sure that you are getting the best quality of yourself while you're doing any of these action sports or any type of recording. And so I'm gonna do a video in the very near future that helps us understand those 7 modes so that way we can make the best out of this Insta360 X4 camera. And now for the photo resolution, which is going to be much more simplistic, is that each of these cameras are going to have a resolution, and they're not going to have a frames per second because typically when you're capturing a picture, it's going to be still. So the frames per second aspect of photo taking isn't applied to still photos. And so as per the official Insta360 website, the outer camera lens is going to be approximately 72 megapixels. And then the inner lens is going to be approximately 18 megapixels. And I didn't throw that word approximation in just per my script. That's actually what the Insta360's website says. Continuing on with modes, except for this time we're talking about photo modes. There's regular photos, again that's going to be using the single lens. There's high dynamic range or HDR photos, starlight interlapse, and then burst. So now that we've got some of those camera details and kind of the specs out of the way, let's talk a little bit more about the hardware. And so the first thing that we're going to talk about is going to be the fact that the Insta360 X4 comes with these lens guards. I'm not quite sure how good the camera is going to pick this up, but this lens guard is going to be used around the actual camera lens on the actual camera. So it essentially screws on so that way it protects your actual camera. And so if you are going to be using these lens guards, there are going to be two different types. There's the standard lens, which we have here. This actually comes in the box with the Insta360 X4. But there is going to be a more premium lens guard that you could purchase off of the Insta360 website or maybe off of Amazon, and they're supposed to offer more clarity when you have a lens guard on your actual Insta360 X4 camera. So if you are going to be using a lens guard on your camera, make sure you go to the settings on the actual camera so that way you can change the type of lens guard you're using. So for instance, you don't typically want to have a standard lens guard used on the premium setting and vice versa. And so you might be wondering, do I need these lens guards in order to use my camera? No, not at all. You could actually use this camera without the lens guard, but I highly recommend that you try your very best to keep these lenses safe because of the fact that if you're not using a lens guard and you crack, drop, scratch, whatever, any of these lenses on your camera, that's all she wrote. You can get the lens fixed, but you will have to send the device back and Insta360 will go ahead and repair it for you, which equates to you having downtime and not being able to use your cool new toy. So while I was in Seattle, I recorded all of these shots with the automatic setting for color profiles. I didn't change any of the ISOs or the aperture. I didn't change anything to be more saturated or whatever. I actually just kept it all on auto because again, I wanted to keep it as natural and organic as possible. But if you are looking to kind of adjust some of the color profiles on this camera, they do allow you to select from the options of standard, vivid, and flat. So standard again is going to be what I used for this video. And then if you wanted to go ahead and use vivid to make some of those colors pop a little bit more, and then if you wanted to use flat again to kind of dull down some of the colors, you could use that as well. What you don't have as an option on this Insta360 X4 camera is D-Log. So if you're not familiar with the term D-Log, you're probably not going to have to worry about this D-Log term too much, but for cinematographers, for videographers, for content creators, a lot of people will record their videos in D-Log M so that way they can do the color adjustments in post editing later in some type of software. And again, the X4 does not offer any D-Log M type of video recording. So now let's kind of steer away from photo resolutions and video resolutions and let's talk more about audio. So most of the footage that I captured while I was in Seattle is going to be the audio from the built-in mic on the X4. So the X4 actually has 4 microphones and I'll show you that in an unboxing video, but these 4 microphones are utilized for not just capturing regular audio, it's used to have auto wind reduction or maybe active wind reduction, and then it also has the capability of doing stereo audio inputs as well as directional focus. So most of that is pretty self-explanatory, but directional focus allows you to really hone in on where this mic is supposed to be collecting information from, which is a pretty cool feature because if I'm recording like this, I can actually have the particular camera listen to audio on the opposite side of the camera versus listening to me. And again, just really helps with that immersion and really helps for that content creator or whoever is using this camera to really capture those moments without actually having to focus on capturing those moments. And one of the coolest things I had to say about the audio for this camera is the fact that it does pair to other external mics like the Rode mic, the DJI Mic 2, as well as your AirPods or your Samsung Galaxy Buds. They actually allow for all of that kind of audio collection and it can be used as part of the videos that you are taking with your Insta360 X4. Now I can't attest to the Apple AirPods or the Galaxy Buds Pro, but I can say that in this video, and you'll see it later, that I did sync up my DJI Mic 2 to the Insta360 X4 and the audio quality was pretty good. Obviously the DJI Mic 2 is doing all of the work for the audio. All right, so now let's talk about something that I'm not overly pleased with the camera, is the fact that this is a pretty heavy device. I mean, look at it, it's a thick particular camera. I mean, it's not by any means something you could kind of throw in your pocket and just kind of forget it. And if you're going to be throwing this in your book bag or your purse or your tech bag, it won't really matter. But if you do put this particular X4 camera in your pocket, you're going to know it's there because it weighs 203 grams. If you're not familiar with the weight of 203 grams, go to your kitchen, go to your pantry, find a can of tomatoes, and that's going to be how heavy this camera is. I would say it's about the same weight with an iPhone 14 Pro Max with a case on it. These two are going to be almost the same weight. I would say that the Insta360 X4 seems a little bit heavier because of its form factor, while as the 14 Pro Max has kind of the weight distributed a little bit. Continuing on with physical attributes of this camera is going to be the fact that this thing comes with a case. And it's actually not a case in the regular sense that you would assume. So this case right here just came off of the camera, and this case is actually a thermal case. While yes, this case is plastic and it will do some protection for the camera from those drops and dings and whatnot. However, this camera is also going to be used for reducing the heat on this action camera. And so if you're kind of scratching your head there and like, reducing the heat, why? Is it gonna catch fire? The answer is no, it's not a Samsung phone, but the thing is that these action cameras are meant to be in use. They're meant to be with the wind hitting them. They're supposed to be an action camera. So if, for instance, if you're using this as like a studio camera and there's not a lot of wind to keep it cool or whatever, then it's actually going to heat up. And again, it's not gonna blow up, but this case does help kind of mitigate some of that heat. So when you do put this case on, it's actually going to kind of disperse the heat from the camera, and it's going to be absorbed by the actual case. There are going to be two ports on this camera, and you can see here it's going to be covered up by this little door right here. There is a little bit of a lock mechanism there, and then so once you press that lock mechanism, it opens up that door. Again, that is going to be USB-C, and is going to allow for data transfer as well as charging. The other port that you're going to be looking at is going to be this one right here, the more longer rectangular, and it's just below the USB charging port, and that's going to be, again, there's going to be a little locking mechanism here. And then it pops out. This is going to be the battery. So the camera bundle that I got for this X4 came with an extra battery from Costco. So you know how Costco works. But these batteries are going to be interchangeable. They're going to be the ones that allow for you to pop the battery out, pop a new battery in, and keep going. Within this battery section, there is going to be a section for a micro SD card. And so you can see the micro SD card slot kind of right there. And I'm gonna go and press it, so that way you can kind of see it there. So this particular bundle that I got from Costco, again, came with an extra battery, but it also came with a Insta360 proprietary SD card, because in order to capture some of the content, let's say 8K, or maybe you want a higher frames per second, you will have to have a micro SD card that can handle it. And if you don't have a micro SD card that can handle all of that read-write functions for all of that data, you definitely will either, one, run out of space, or two, you're just not going to capture that content effectively, and you don't want to be in that situation. So in order to put the battery back in, you can see that there is like a little arrow right here, and that is going to be pointing upwards. So whenever you do that, you can then see that the particular battery is in there. And in order to make sure that this camera is waterproof, you do not want to see anything that's red. So here you can see there's a little bit of red there. If you see anything red on your device, especially as it comes to the ports, that means that this is not waterproof. So you want to make sure that you press on everything on all of those open sections, so that way you can hear that click. And then that click then signifies the fact that you are now having a waterproof device. In regards to battery in this Insta360 X4 camera, Insta360 states that this battery and this camera are gonna run for 67% longer than its predecessor. And I'll actually have to attest to that. But when I was in Seattle and I was testing out this camera, I had to charge it once, maybe twice, and I was in Seattle for 12 hours. And so this 2290 milliamp hour battery is phenomenal. I would have to say Insta360 really knocked out of the park with this battery, because I was very impressed with the performance of the batteries with the X4 camera while I was in Seattle. Insta360 also states that you can charge this particular camera and the battery inside of it from 0 to 80% in 38 minutes. But then if you have the ability to wait a little bit longer, you can charge this particular device from 0 to 100% in just under an hour at 55 minutes. Which is just phenomenal in my opinion, because when you are without your camera, that's content that you're missing. And so with that additional 67% battery performance, Insta360 is stating that one battery charge at 100% can last you 135 minutes. And so I just want to fully state that that is super subjective to what type of resolution and what type of video mode that you're using. If you're just shooting this thing at 1080p with 30 frames per second, you'll probably reach that 135 minutes. However, if you're shooting at 8K with 30 frames per second, or if you're maybe shooting at 5.7K with 60 frames per second, all of that computational data and all of the cameras turned on, the LED screen, your battery is going to take a hit. So with the 135 minute time frame that Insta360 is promoting, I'm assuming that's going to be with the best possible shooting scenarios possible. And again, honestly, even though I'm very impressed with the battery performance on the X4, I'm not sure I got 135 minutes with one battery charge. But like I said, this camera does allow for you to remove the battery. So if you have multiple batteries, you take one battery out and you start continuing with the next battery, and you have a little downtime with capturing any of your content. So now let's switch to the other side of the camera, this beautiful 2.5-inch LED screen. This is an upgrade from the X3 screen. I don't know quite the dimensions of the screen on the X3, but this thing, it's gorgeous. It's nice and vivid, it's colorful, it's reactive, and it actually has Gorilla Glass. And so if you're not familiar with the term Gorilla Glass, it's not actually glass that's made by gorillas. It's actually going to stand for how durable is this screen. And so there are different varying degrees and tiers of Gorilla Glass, but I know that Gorilla Glass on cell phones typically tends to be pretty durable, and so this one is going to be just as durable. And so if you have a little bit extra cash, you can head over to Amazon and get like a screen protector for this beautiful screen, because honestly, I don't know how I did it, but there is a nick on the screen already, and my OCD is just going crazy. So right out of the box, this particular camera is 100% waterproof. However, as per the Insta360 website, they recommend that if you're going to be doing any diving with this camera, you should be using their dive case. And just because of the way the light refracts underwater, if you don't have that dive case, some of the content you get while underwater may be a little bit funky. So if you are going to be diving, make sure that you have a case on this, not because of the fact that it's not waterproof, but because of the way the light refracts and how that may affect your video. And so with that is, this camera, again, right out of the box, is waterproof. You can actually dive with this at 33 feet or 10 meters, and then it'd be perfectly fine. But again, without that dive case, things may be a little bit weird. All right, so now let's talk about the non-tangible facts about this camera. Let's talk about the things we can't touch. That's going to be the software. And so Insta360 has really outdone the camera world with their software. A lot of all these kind of special effects and the zoom ins and zoom outs and all of that type of things, it's actually going to be done not within the camera itself, but in their studio software. And you can actually download the studio software as an app with your iPhone or your Android phone, and then you can also have a desktop program that you can use on Windows PC or even also on Mac. And so the actual Insta360 app, as well as the program on your desktop computer, is actually pretty good. It's going to be similar to other video editing software, but the thing is if you want to be able to have all of these cool effects and all of the cool features like the zooming out or the mini world or the 360 effects, you do have to edit within the proprietary studio app and then export that over to your actual video editing software. And so for instance, if you wanted to showcase all of the 360 features and some of the capabilities and some of the effects and whatnot, you will have to do that in post while editing on the studio app first, and then you will have to export that over to Premiere Pro or Filmora or DaVinci Code. Because while the studio software does have built-in editing and effects and whatnot, it's probably not as good as some of those more paid programs like, again, Premiere Pro. More operational software that's outside of the Insta360 Studio app is the fact that you can now have gesture controls. That's going to be both with gestures of your hand or also with your voice. And then you also get this kind of cue feature right here. I'm gonna try to get the camera to focus. Just underneath the power button, there is a cue icon there. And so I apologize if you're not able to see it on the camera, but this cue icon is going to be a quick setting. So essentially, it's going to allow you to create or utilize quick settings for certain situations. So by default, there's a quick setting for motorcycling or skiing or some type of water sports. But then that quick feature also allows you to customize a quick feature for you. So for instance, if you're bicycling, or maybe you're canoeing, or maybe you're doing basketball, or whatever the situation, you can customize that quick setting. So that way you press that cue and you start recording, and the camera is automatically going to switch those settings to what that activity is. Which is just a really cool feature because of the fact that sometimes I'll be riding my one wheel around and then that's a certain type of setting, versus if I was going to be doing a hike and that would then be a different type of setting. And again, I'm going to be making a video of all these different settings on the camera as well as in the studio software, so that way you can also utilize this camera to its max potential. All right, so now let's talk about one of the most important accessories for this Insta360 camera, and that's going to be this thing right here. Yeah, this is a selfie stick. You remember those things that we used to joke people for having a selfie stick? Well, Insta360 is bringing this back, but Insta360 is actually making this actually magical, because once you connect this particular selfie stick into this X4 camera, as long as you are holding it like this selfie stick area is going to disappear. The way the cameras are, it's going to actually capture all of that information except this stick, which is just phenomenal because that really gives this camera the ability to give off some fake drone shots. Just in case you don't have a drone yet and you want to give more creative quality to your content creation, you could go ahead and use these sticks. And so with the Insta360 X4, they're now introducing what they call the flow state stabilization. That's just a term that Insta360 is actually using to promote the fact that the videos, the content that you're capturing with your Insta360 X4 is going to be super smooth. All right, so now let's talk about the most important aspect for this camera, and that's gonna be pricing. Insta360 on their website has about 12 different bundles that you could purchase because there are so many different types of usages for this camera. So the price is actually going to be a little bit more subjective to what you want. However, if you're watching this before Black Friday of 2024, this camera is running for $429, and that does include a micro SD card, the selfie stick, and an extra battery, which is actually a phenomenal price because of the fact that if you're using this to capture content, maybe you're doing YouTube or Instagram or whatever other platform, this is really going to level up your game. Is that the cheapest it's ever going to be? Probably not, because of the fact that this is the X4. In 2025, there's probably going to be an X5, and then the X4 is going to be dropping in price, which is not going to be a bad deal unless you just absolutely have to have the newest camera out. Also, you have to keep in mind that there may be potential for the Insta360 company to sell this at a bigger discount for Christmas because, I mean, it's Christmas. All right, so based off of my first impressions and pretty much my review of this camera, I'm gonna have to give it a review of a 9.7311. And the reason for that is because of two things. Is you do have extra batteries, like this one, but there isn't a way to charge these batteries unless you buy an extra accessory like a charging cradle where you're able to charge these independently of the camera. Otherwise, if you have an extra battery and you don't have a charging cradle, the only way to charge that battery is by sticking it back into the camera and then charging your camera. That is counterintuitive because of the fact that if you're trying to capture more content, you're going to need the camera. And so that's just a little bit of a gripe for me. If I'm going to have two batteries, I definitely want to be able to charge the other battery while I'm using my secondary battery. And then hopefully by the time my primary battery is done charging, I can swap it out and again, continue to capture content. And the other reason why I didn't give this camera a 10 out of 10 is because the actual studio software with your iPhone or your Samsung or your Google phone is the fact that it can be quite taxing on your phone. If you don't have the newest phone with the best processors, it's going to chew on your phone's batteries and then it can actually slow down your phone because you actually have to stay within the app to make these edits. And continuing on with the studio software is the fact that on the desktop computer situation, if you are going to be editing on a Mac or a PC, the learning curve for the studio application or program is actually quite steep. I am not new to doing any type of video editing or software and things like that. However, just the general concepts of where to do this or what to do there in that program for the studio app is a little bit jarring. And there is a tutorial, but it's still a little bit too much for the average person. And that could be a little bit discouraging because of the fact that if you're not into software, you're not good at figuring out how to do certain things in the software, the studio app can be a little bit of a stopping point. As for the camera itself, I would have to say that usability for the actual camera is pretty simple. While I was in Seattle, I actually ran into an elderly Asian couple who had the exact same camera. I would say they were in their 70s, and they were walking around Seattle being tourists, and they actually pulled me aside because they didn't know how to use this camera. And I was able to teach them how to use this camera within 5, maybe 10 minutes of just showing them the basics. And from there, they were able to go ahead and go about their day with the recording. I did give them my number so that way they could call or text me should they have any additional questions, and they didn't call or text me. So I'm assuming either I'm a really good teacher or this camera is just user friendly when you're capturing content. And so I'd greatly appreciate it if you took the time to go ahead and like and subscribe this video, so that way your engagement with this video actually spreads my content to the deep dark corners of the YouTube algorithm and gets my content further out there faster. And to those of you who have already subscribed and watched my videos regularly, you all are rock stars, and I'll see you all in the next one.